Good morning. Again, I guess. Last fall, consulting with the Sunday Services Committee, I planned to do this service on Islam because some people were asking me to start taking a look at the world religions now again, the ones that we hang banners on the wall celebrating. They said maybe we need to learn a little bit more about them. So I decided on Islam, and when I first planned it, I had no idea that it would be so relevant to current events. I chose it then because we'd just settled the Adam family, our Syrian refugees. I just had lunch with them yesterday. They're doing well. They are Muslim. They are not particularly religious or observant. And they no more understand the craziness that has possessed their nation than any of us do. Like most refugees, they were just caught up in something terrible and are trying to make life as best they can. But recent events like so-called Muslim bans and small Toronto protest marches asking that we ban Muslims in Canada as well, and a steady uptick of racist rhetoric and refugees fleeing across the border in Manitoba and Canada from the United States have given this series a whole new meaning. Guest speaker Salima Versi started us off last week, and I understand that she offered insight into one of the more liberal branches of Islam, one that seems to share an awful lot in common with Unitarian Universalists. But this week I want to offer some thoughts on the core teachings and traditions of Islam, and hopefully do away with some popular misconceptions. Next week I'm going to look more at the current political context and the concerns we have about violence and terrorism and all of those things, which are, again, misconceptions. Well, a number of years ago, I was in Boston for some international conference or another, and I went along with a junior youth group on a trip to a mosque. An old classmate of mine was teaching them about neighboring faiths, was the program. Now, for most of us, I don't know about you, but for me certainly, Islam still seems mysterious and distant. I may have read about it in school, and I've discovered that when I read about it in school, I tended to read the textbooks that were deep and philosophical and esoteric and, frankly, above my head. And it was hard to find out basics. So I was quite eager to make this visit. We know that there are about 3.5 to 4 million Muslims on this continent. And even so there are so many people, I still tend to see it as foreign in language, in custom, and theology. The prayers are all in Arabic, right? And then there are all of those music that's all like Middle Eastern and symbols, and that's different. And then there are those crazy terrorists who die in the name of Allah, led by those even crazier mullahs. What kind of religion can that be? Well, in fact, everything I just said is pretty much false, taken out of context or blown way out of proportion. One of the most interesting facets of our visit to the mosque was the reaction of the children and the parents who accompanied us as the day went on. Now, as we arrived at this Islamic center in a suburban area of Newton, they all took a quiet, deep breath. So did I. Here we are. Okay, what are we going to find here? The people looked a little bit strange, most of them. The women wore headscarves. We weren't really sure what was going to happen inside. What did happen was that we were greeted by a pretty typical church mom, somebody not unlike Lauren Kay, our director of religious exploration. And she took us inside a big classroom that was filled with a bunch of kids and a few adults. She welcomed us and she began to explain about her religion. And from time to time she had to go into the adjoining room to shush the little kids who were getting a bit out of hand. And then one of the men of the mosque would occasionally try and take over the question and answer session in a way that some folks who love the sound of their own voice are wont to do. But our church mom would come back in the room and do a wonderful job of politely shutting him down. Towards the end, she explained the proper manners that were required in the prayer room. They were very simple and naturally respectful, and then took us over. And when all were assembled, the first thing that happened is we sat through way too many announcements. There were announcements about potlucks and announcements about events at the school, and there were announcements about community things that they were invited to. There are some people who think we have an announcement problem in this church, and nothing compared to it. It must have gone on for 10 minutes. Interestingly enough, then the service started, the brief prayer service, the ritual prayers, and that only lasted about 10 minutes as well. Islam expects prayers 5 times a day, but there's little else in the way of ritual and ceremony. Oh, and at the end, there was a homily. It lasted 4 minutes. We probably could learn something from that. There are perhaps, throughout all of this, children were running around. Some of the women were busy in the kitchen getting food ready. It felt like any Unitarian church I've ever been to, except perhaps that there were more kids in the room. For us, some of the misconceptions began to melt away. We left feeling very comfortable and maybe even a little embarrassed by our earlier anxiety. So let's look at a couple of these misconceptions, things that I had not known before that. The first is the role of mullahs. We've all heard about the mullahs, oh my goodness. There are actually no ordained clerics within Islam. Mullah is simply a leader, usually elected by the congregation of the mosque. Some of them are highly educated. Some of them are charismatic leaders. Some are both. Some are neither. The point is, they're not ordained or certified by a central church. They are not confined to sending out a special teaching. They are elected by a group of people within the mosque who think that this would be a good leader for them. And that has good points and bad points. Liberal mosques elect liberal leaders. Conservative mosques elect conservative leaders, and some of them get waylaid by people who have bad ideas. Not many, however. In fact, Islam is the most radically democratic major faith in the world. Each person has the right to read and interpret the Quran for themselves. Indeed, it is expected. And most of the men are asked to teach, at least some of the time. I think that's why we had a 4-minute homily. Somebody perhaps didn't do his homework. There is no required belief except one. When people give, and there is no required belief among the leaders that they elect. So the second one that often comes up for Westerners is the terrorist questions. And it is as wrong to see ISIL terrorists as representative as Islam as it is to see the young man who shot 9 black people dead in the South Carolina church as representative of Christianity. Terrorists are deeply angry people and usually deeply disturbed people. They have been twisted by hate and sometimes given a particular obsessive focus by charismatic leaders who are also twisted by hate. But they are very, very few in number. These terrorists lack every compassionate and forgiving quality their religion names as its highest value. They grab the banner of religion in order to gain support and lend legitimacy to their psychopathic desire to destroy. So let's pull away a few more veils and look at what Islam professes to be. Islam began in the year 610 of the Common Era when Muhammad, a young businessman, was chosen by God, Allah, to be his 25th and final prophet. The angel the West knows as Gabriel, but he knew as Jalazriel, revealed the first 5 verses of the Quran to Muhammad when he was in the cave of Hira near Mecca. Now Muhammad was illiterate, so all he could do was memorize these 5 verses and then run and find himself a scribe. And so it would take years before the entire Quran was written down in this way. And to this day, the highest honor one can give the Quran is learning the verses by heart in honor of what Muhammad did. But nevertheless, Muhammad did not wait those years before he began preaching a religion of submission to a single God. Now, Islam was not created out of whole cloth. As Christianity was an offshoot of ancient Judaism, so was Islam. As we all know from our Hebrew Bible studies, Abram would one day be named Abraham and become the first father of the Hebrew tradition. Now, he was an old guy, and his wife Sarai, and he had never had children. So she arranged for Abram to sleep with her maid Hagar. They had a child. The result was a son named Ishmael. Now, God made a promise to Abram, and soon Sarai, in her 80-some years, conceived and gave birth to a son named Isaac. And so began the birth of the Hebrew tribes. Meanwhile, Hagar and Ishmael were turned out into the desert and exiled. Well, Islam believes that they survived, and Ishmael became the next prophet in a line leading towards Muhammad. Similarly, Jesus would become the 24th prophet, and Muhammad, as I said, the 25th. So Islam accepts and honors the wisdom and value of Christianity and Judaism. It simply believes that Muhammad, several hundred years after Jesus, received the final and updated messages from God. But all three religions worship the same divinity. It's merely vagaries of language and interpretation that label them God, Yahweh, and Allah. I've often said that religion cannot be separated from the culture in which it arises, and this is most true in Islam. A major part of Muhammad's mission was to bring an end to the kind of intertribal and interfaction slaughter that we see today in the Arabian world. He believed that he was sent to unite the people and end tribal warfare once and for all. Okay, things didn't work out exactly as planned over the long haul, but in his lifetime he had great success. Pre-Islamic Arabia was caught up in a vicious cycle of warfare in which tribal vendettas were a way of life. Muhammad himself survived several assassination attempts and once had to flee for his life to Medina. So Islam was born in this deadly war of tribal survival. But as soon as a feeling of security developed, the Prophet began to preach peace and compassion, not war. Indeed, he spread Islam across the Arabian Peninsula during his lifetime through an ingenious campaign of nonviolence and coalition building that would have made Gandhi proud. When he died in 632, 22 years later after his revelation, he had almost single-handedly brought peace to the Arabian Peninsula. Now, because the Quran was revealed in the context of all-out war, several passages do indeed deal with armed struggle. But the interesting thing that often doesn't get quoted is that even when violence and warfare are seen as a legitimate means of living, they're seen as a legitimate means of self-defense only. And whenever you have to be attacked first, and whenever there's a verse about violence, there is immediately a verse about making peace with your neighbor and showing charity. Like some fundamental Christian preachers who sell more hate than religion, some religious leaders cite the passages on war selectively, ignoring the longer, compassionate, and peaceful verses that almost always follow. Like the Bible, you can prove anything you want to, citing verses in the Quran when you take them out of context and put them together in a way that supports your point of view. And the negative leaders, the hateful leaders, can twist words. Right? We've all heard about the word jihad. Right? What does it mean? Right? Crusade, holy war, something like that. The jihadists are the warriors for, supposedly Allah. The thing is, that's a misinterpretation of the word. All it means is struggle. And usually it is used in the Quran to mean the internal and personal struggle that every person faces to submit to the truth of God's will. And we can extrapolate that for our humanists to the struggle to do what we know is the right thing to do. That's the jihad. That's the struggle. It's not warfare or hatred or bombs. It's this internal thing about making ourselves better human beings. There is one Quranic passage where Muhammad, returning from battle, says it was a jihad, but now the far greater jihad is to seek peace and to begin to act with compassion. To get over the hatred, to get over the anger, the wish for revenge, and to make peace instead. The word Islam means submission, meaning complete submission to a single God. And the word is related to salam, which means peace. And every Muslim I have ever talked with has asserted that Islam is a religion of peace. As well, Muslims believe that no one can be forced to convert. The Quran insists there must be no coercion in matters of faith. In the 7th and 8th centuries, as the Islam spread rapidly through all of North America and up to the Franco-Spanish border in the west and the Balkans in the east, Jews and Christians were never forced to convert. The best example is probably the Eastern Orthodox Church. It has been based in Constantinople, now Istanbul, since it split from the Roman Church in 1054. And for almost all of that time, the city has been under Islamic rule. The Orthodox Christians were allowed to gather, to worship, to build their churches, they had full rights as citizens, something no Muslim experienced anywhere in the Christian world. In one of his last sermons, Muhammad said, "O people, we have formed you into nations and tribes so that you may know one another." Not to conquer, subjugate, revile, or slaughter, but to reach out towards one another with intelligence and understanding. Now, the Quran itself is complex, sometimes confusing, requires a lifetime of study, but the basic teachings of Islam are extremely simple, and they resolve into what are called 5 pillars. The first is accept that there is no other God but Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger. Say that aloud with belief in your heart in the middle of this service, and you become a Muslim. At least in their view. So be careful. Don't want to lose anybody. No, I'm kidding. There are no complicated applications or rituals or sacraments or anything that obtain. All you have to do is decide one day that you are a Muslim, acknowledge God and acknowledge Muhammad, and you are done. Then you have to learn how to pray 5 times a day in the prescribed manner. This involves ritual ablutions, washing, facing a prayer mat towards Mecca, and following some very simple movements and reciting some easily learned prayers, and finally prostrating yourself, because it is about submission. Third, charity. You are expected to share yourself and your wealth generously, to model Allah's compassion in your life, to be like Him. Fourth, to fast during the month of Ramadan from sunrise to sunset. And then fifth, if you are able physically and financially to make a pilgrimage to Mecca once in your lifetime. Do that and you are a Muslim in fine standing. And yet all those rules have exceptions. If you're sick, you should eat during Ramadan. If you can't afford it, you don't have to go to Mecca. You just go to Mecca in your heart. That counts. I'm going to leave the conclusion of this part of the sermon, at least. Next week we'll continue, to someone I met at that mosque. He was 17 years old. He'd grown up Jewish. He had converted to Islam after the 9/11 attacks. He said, "Don't make the mistake of confusing the faith with the society. Sure, there are repressive regimes and anti-woman societies within Islam, but that's the society they live in, not the religion we practice. It's no different from the way Americans had slavery and denied women the vote once upon a time. Those things had to do with culture, not Christianity or Judaism. And it is the same with Islam. I found nothing in the classical understanding of Islam that I cannot fully respect and honor. If Islam fails to live up to its origins in any particular nation, in any particular place, in any particular group of people, it's only because their religion, like all other religion, is in the hands of deeply fallible human beings. Islam is a religion of peace. Christianity is a religion of peace. Judaism is a religion of peace. Unitarianism is a religion of peace. And we would have peace in the world if all the religious people just decided to get it right. Amen. The reading is by Jan Tadeo, a Unitarian minister, and it's called Ibrahim's Prayer. Of course, Ibrahim being the Islamic name for Abraham. Beloved children of the oneness of many names, you who cover the land in numbers greater than the stars, I petition you, I pray to you, because you are the fruit of God's promises to the world, because each of you holds a piece of the truth that is, because the vision of beloved community needs each one of you. And this is what I pray. Show loving kindness for one another. Use wisely the unique gifts of your humanity, your free will, imagination, creativity, compassion, your knowledge, power of understanding and awareness, that all is an image of the highest God. See the beauty in your cousin's eye, the wisdom in your sibling's smile. Listen for the truth that is unspoken in each heart. Hold one another with tenderness and allow love to transcend fear. Fear that too often darkens your thoughts and poisons your hearts. Come together, followers of Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, peace be upon them all. Embrace the children and followers of all the prophets who call us toward peace, all the seekers and the people of goodwill who adore all that emerges from the mysteries of life. Treasure one another. Call forth the wholeness of your fellow creatures. Protect and renew the sustenance for life, the earth, the air, the water. Hold the fire with gentleness. Use it wisely for growth and goodness. Come together from the deserts, the mountains, the wetlands, and the shores. Lift the veil of indifference, learn to understand one another's plight, and share in the beauty, wonder, and joy, the awe of life. Love mercy and kindness, and walk humbly with one another and with all creation. Love your neighbors as you love yourself. Give to others the full measure of your goodness, so they will give to you the same. As you honor the covenant of your traditions, may you also covenant with all people of goodwill, a covenant of love, compassion, humility, generosity, gratitude, and celebration. May it always be so. Peace, salam, shalom, blessed be. Amen.